Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those on the West Coast. Welcome to our webinar today. We'll let folks get settled in here and start in about 1 minute. As you're getting settled in, just a couple notes. One, we're going to keep you muted, and your line's kind of shut down for right now. Would love questions, comments, considerations, otherwise, any way in which you'd like to participate in the conversation, please feel free to do so. You may do so by dropping comments and questions in the chat function. We also have a Q&A section, which we will utilize for taking in your questions as well. I'll be taking those in throughout Chris's presentation here today, and then we'll field those questions once he's done with the formal part of the presentation. We'll open it up for a Q&A section. With that, we'll also provide you with a few different follow-ups, including the slides from today's session, a recording of our session, and then, of course, ways in which you can reach us if you have questions for us directly that you don't want to ask us here on this call, or don't bring up during our call. So with that, we are successfully a minute and maybe more past our time. My name is Ben Herring. I'm the Director of Partnerships here with CU Collaborate. I'm going to step aside here and hand it off to our COO and head of our merger network, Chris Tissue, who's going to walk you through our new quarterly series of merger updates. Take it away, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I just want to confirm that you can hear me okay, and the slides are populating okay.
Everything looks and sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, hey everyone, thanks so much for spending your afternoon or morning with us here. I know some of you, just looking at the names here, attended us this series last quarter. Really want to just continue to provide quick snapshot and update as new data becomes available to us around mergers and sort of like what we're seeing with like the new data, and just checking in on sort of like major trends and what might be on the horizon for the movement here. Just as a quick update on CU Collaborate, if you aren't familiar with us, we are a QSO that focuses on really pairing expertise or individual expertise or consulting with software and analytics to achieve better outcomes for our credit union members. We do that by combining a bunch of both public and non-public data sets. And you can see the different areas that we choose to focus on in terms of our core competencies. Obviously, as Ben mentioned, I lead our merger network practice, which really seeks to identify who might be good potential fits if credit unions are exploring inorganic growth, with a special emphasis on assessing member value and ultimately what partnerships are going to create the most member value given our not-for-profit cooperative status. So with that, yeah, I just want to dive into some of the metrics real quick in terms of, I know we're in Q3, the title slide said Q2. The latest available data from NCUA is from Q1, which we get in Q2. So want to be hyper clear, and you'll see this multiple times throughout the slides, that the freshest data we have in terms of officially mergers consummated, you see the charter disappear as of end of Q1 2026. And then we can get an idea, essentially a forecast in terms of which credit unions have announced and mergers or intentions to merge through the NCUA process, and there's a comment period there. So do want to just clarify up front sort of like the scope of the data that we're looking at, and I'll repeat that a few times throughout the presentation. As Ben mentioned, please, would love to answer the questions that are most important for you so that we're making this time useful for you. Put them in the chat, or we can follow up via email if that's preferred. One thing I do want to mention as well is that we always like to start with sort of like historical context here. And so What you're seeing here is a slide that we talked about a little bit last time for those of you that joined us last time, but we and Luis Dopico, who's our chief economist, would be remiss if we didn't talk about sort of like the evolution of the credit union movement in the United States throughout its history. And what you see here are three different trend lines. The first is those institutions that are being closed or in this case sort of merged in today's day and age. Those that are being full, and that's in the pink line. And the blue line are those that are being formed. And so you can see really like huge spikes in the creation of new credit unions that happened in like the 30s and then in the 50s and 60s, and then a pretty sharp decline. There was only 3 new credit unions created last year, 0 year to date this year. And so combined with sort of like a steady amount of closures that is sort of consistent, the net effect of that is that the number of total charters in the credit union industry is on somewhat steady decline. Adding on Q1 2026 data to what we were seeing in terms of the full years, looking all the way back to, in terms of this slide, 2014, really focusing in on that sort of like, I'll say like 2019 to even 2025, in terms of the total number of credit unions that are choosing to be merged into another entity, fairly consistent in terms of the total number. Up until I would say even this quarter, it was tracking at about 3% of the total number of credit unions on average per year. I will say, and we'll dig into this a little bit more in following slides, that it's been a slow start to 2026. Only 27 credit unions merged away in the first quarter officially. That compares to about what you can think about, like 35 to 40 a quarter is what was averaged in the years prior to that. Perhaps obviously for those that have done mergers before, that's sort of a lagging indicator around sort of the conversations and the planning that go into that. And so those are the result oftentimes of potentially like a year or more worth of work, 6 months maybe on the shorter end of things. But yeah, a little bit of a slower start to the year. I think interestingly, and something we talked about last quarter, there are a lot of really large multi-billion-dollar mergers that happened in 2025, most of which sort of finalized in Q3 of last year, which had this sort of dramatic spike that's shown by the line here. In terms of the average asset size of merging institutions, that number came back down to earth in Q1, where we didn't have any really large mergers of multi-billion-dollar credit unions consummated, although there were many that were announced, or a handful that were announced. And so I think, if you're able to participate on this call with us in future quarters, I expect that number will likely come up a little bit here, just based on some of the press releases we've seen so far this year. Looking out for the rest of the year, we can get a decent idea based off of a preliminary step required for any federally insured credit union, which is pretty much all but 100 or so institutions today. They have to apply to the NCUA, regardless of whether they're a state charter or a federal charter, to actually get the merger approved. The NCUA currently has a process of posting comments on that, so that there's a public forum for doing so. And so you can use that publicly available structured data set as a way of assessing what's coming down the pike. And you can also see that, that data, at least if you're looking at the 22 that are planning to vote on a prospective merger in Q2, is still kind of less than what we were seeing in the 2 years preceding 2026. So we had 30 in 2025 and 33 in 2024. So I would look at that and you can basically infer that this year might be a slower year in terms of the total number of credit unions merging. There is a bit of seasonality that you can see here in Q4, more announcements, so to speak. So you might see a little bit of an uptick, but I think at this point, looks to be a little bit slower in terms of like the total number of mergers that are coming down the pipe. About, here we're saying about 24% less. In terms of kind of unpacking that stat up there around the average size of the institutions that are choosing to merge and actually showing you on this slide the relative makeup of those institutions that are merging in so that you can see the percentage based on these asset tranches here. The trend that we spoke about last time and that we're continuing to focus and, it alluded to like, multi-billion dollar institutions is that really kind of bucks the historical trend of credit union mergers and really like what you saw in the past and sort of like accentuated the further back you go is that by and large, institutions that are merging away are largely smaller. The majority of them under 50 million in assets. So you'll see like last year, 2025, 71% of the institutions that merged away were under $50 million in assets. Although on the top end, you do see a gradual increase in the relative percentage of institutions, I'll say like 250 million and above. And so you can, in 2023, about 4% of institutions that merged were in that category, whereas at year end 2025, it was 9%. And then, for those 27 institutions that merged in last quarter, 8%, were in that 250 million and above. And then, if you expand that to the 100 million and above, you can see 22% were between 100 million and 250 million. And so, as you sort of slowly look across this row, you're tracking, I think, a change that is bore out on that first slide a little bit, but also you're seeing on like an individual and case by case basis, and that is that institutions that I think previously we would assume to have reached sufficient size to remain independent are deciding that the best path for their membership is to partner with another institution to continue to provide good value to their members. So, this is a trend that I think, continues to be relevant and something that we're watching. And, we'll continue to tack on new data and see just like as we get larger sample size as the year goes on, how these percentages shake out. The other helpful thing or interesting thing can be sort of like the why behind why institutions are choosing to partner. And there is hopefully some data that we can glean, at least from the NCUA, in terms of the reason for merging. They ask every institution that applies sort of like why they're choosing to merge, and they give them this pick list. As you can see, the bottom categories are sort of less and less prevalent. And so really sort of like key elements that we largely track are sort of like, are you doing it for what I would classify as strategic reasons, which are expanded services? And you can see that continues to be about 7 out of 10 mergers, 8 out of 10 if you look at Q1 2026. Succession planning, which I think is really the inability to obtain officials, whether that's board or executive or both. It's not clearly mentioned, but it does, that has been holding steady at about 10% or 1 out of every 10 in the last few years, and then Q1 2026. And then the rest of the categories around poor financial condition, it was very interesting to me last year and how that seemingly popped relative to the years prior to it. Seems to have come back down to earth, at least in Q1. So the other major reason for institutions citing the need to merge is that it's somewhat defensive and they're not really having great financial success. I think importantly, this would be people who are volunteering that is the case. This would not include emergency mergers or NCUA assisted mergers necessarily. And so, the other sort of like main factor here is financial distress for those institutions and needing to, oftentimes combine with a larger institution that, may sort of still strategically support, their member value going forward, but ultimately may be able to absorb some losses that the smaller financial institution could not. So, just giving you some refresh data here as of Q1 2026. I think by and large, like things continue to be fairly steady in terms of the reasons credit unions are listing. Quick snapshot on geography. We won't spend a ton of time here. The blue bar is the last, 23, 24, 25, last three completed fiscal years, and sort of showing on a bar chart here the number of institutions that have merged in each of the sort of like states that lead it. But I think the sort of like more interesting point is the line graph, which shows the relative percentage of all credit unions there. So even though Connecticut only has had 16 mergers between 23 and 2025, that made up just a little over 18% of all credit unions in Connecticut. And so on a pro rata or per capita basis, little higher merger rate there than some of these other states, which probably just have more credit unions, or they do have more credit unions in them. And so even though they have larger by number of mergers, it represents a lower percentage of the overall credit unions in that state. So you can see for Q1, Illinois had sort of led the states with five, Pennsylvania and Indiana both with three. Want to always keep these, we've gotten positive feedback that keeping these webinars to about 15 minutes is ideal, both for your busy schedules, but also to leave space for some questions and answers. So I'm going to wrap up here and keep it short. I think the one thing that I had thrown out there on our last quarter is sort of like what's next, or the key questions that I'm tracking, and I want to sort of just keep these consistent throughout the year. But does the 3% annual merger pace continue? And that would be like approximately 140 or 160. I would bet heavily on the under now, based on some of those slides that I had shared before and the reasons before. Strategic mergers continue to be sort of like the largest reason. I think we saw that, that is probably a yes, and will continue to be a yes. Whether that makes up, 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 going forward will be interesting to track. Spoken to a lot of existing members and prospects around the succession planning rule and what impact that might have on the inability to obtain officials reason. I think when we spoke last, I could see it kind of going in both ways, either sort of having some credit unions face the uncomfortable truth that they may not actually have a good succession plan and or help mitigate that risk, which I think is what the NCUA absolutely had intended. And so, I can't really tell. I think it's sort of like status quo based on the percentages that we saw before, but it is an interesting dynamic for that tranche of credit unions who are really just struggling to find the next generation of leadership within their organization. Last time we talked, it was a little bit of an interesting period because I think in successive weeks we had seen like two different mergers voted down, one in Indiana and one in Pennsylvania. And so that's definitely a higher rate. There's only about 1 year, or less than 1% of credit union mergers get voted down. So it was interesting to see if that continues. There has not been one since. So I don't know that voting members are facing any other issues, and those, it seemed to be a concern about losing like the local institution, which I think is a concern that credit union professionals also express. Yeah, sort of don't see that continuing to be an issue right now. And then, for us in particular, at CU Collaborate, we feel like, and we've structured our merger network really around making sure that we're sort of optimizing for member value as one of the key considerations around partnering, and who to partner with and who's going to serve your membership in both directions better. And so historically, the way that mergers have kind of happened is sort of based on personal connection and sort of network, and obviously a number of other data factors. And we felt like there was an opportunity for the industry to move to a more data-driven and competitive process that, really sought to optimize that. I haven't seen a ton of mention of that in a lot of the member notices, but sometimes the member notices can also be fairly prescriptive in terms of just like meeting the regulatory requirements for those. So I think jury's still out there. I don't know that we'll ever have like a structured data set per se to speak to that, but it is something that we are sort of tracking and interested in, and we'll look to add any color commentary to that in future updates. But yeah, that's my prepared remarks for today. And then yeah, Ben, I don't know if any questions have come through the chat, but would be happy to answer any of those if we have them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I
Yep.
don't have anything coming through the chat or the Q&A section yet. We'll give folks a little bit of time to digest the information that you provided here. One of the questions that I'm getting in conversations with the credit unions that we work with, and I'm sure you probably have too, anything that you can elaborate on, the idea that credit unions could or should have a like a discussion around their merger strategy. It is a topic of conversation that continues to come up. Should we have one? Do we have one? And if so, what does that look like? So the actual question itself that I'm typically getting is, are other credit unions like, even if their intent is not to necessarily merge, are they putting together these strategies, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question and something that we end up working a lot with our members on, Ben, and something I actually really enjoy, to be honest, is that um, I think like if I were to just sort of like break down people's merger strategies into like a decision tree, it's, are you interested at all in mergers? Yes, no. If no, most likely those credit unions will do like the NCUA a solid if they're coming with an emergency merger in their backyard, but otherwise like not interested at all. They, in some instances just do not believe in them, period. For others, it's yes, we're interested in them, and then it's either we have an active strategy or we have a passive approach to them. If it's active, you might be working with us and sort of trying to make connections and sort of help, put actual process towards that merger strategy. If it's passive, you're still probably receiving, some inbound conversations. I would say regardless of whether you're active or passive, what I will often see really create a lot of busy work and, at best and sort of frustration is on the passive, sort of both active and passive sides, they haven't done the work of reaching internal consensus on what good looks like for them. And so there can be a kind of like inefficient process where they get an opportunity either because they've actively sourced it or it's sort of fallen in their laps. And now they have the sort of like challenge of both trying to get internal consensus around whether this is good, which means that you're sort of like reactively developing that strategy and probably not in a super um, smooth and relaxing way. It's kind of hard to reach consensus with people when they feel rushed and maybe sort of like stressed. So you may actually force decision making that isn't super well thought out. And then you're also sort of balancing you're trying to also appease that other potential partner and sort of be respectful and honor their timeline and sort of like what they're trying to do, which is just hard. Perhaps obviously those are unlikely to be successful because that's just a hard thing. And then unfortunately, I mean, coming out of that, you may have a better shared perspective. In my experience, you almost need to like reset and then step through the process of getting consensus. I call it readiness or board education, whatever it is. I don't think, that could be like a formal policy. I mean, I would certainly write down what and memorialize it. Some will go as far as being like, this is our formal, partnership strategy or merger strategy. And others will just say, well, we talked about it, we memorialize it, and we revisit it, maybe once a year. I know we're coming up on strategic planning season, so happy to help out with that if folks, are looking to just either cover the topic or maybe tackle something like consensus building. But I think it's a good idea if for the very reason that you can say no quickly to things that come to you instead of having to, either rehash that same conversation or, start it from new. And then, if you are trying to be more sophisticated and mature about a process and running a real rigid process around it, it definitely sets you up to be, efficient and sort of like execute on that process in a way that's most likely to get, whatever your desired outcome is. So. Uh, yeah.
Thanks, Chris. We do have a question coming through the chat. Could you elaborate, Chris, on I'm just going to review the question. Do you track and are you able to share what percentage of mergers the merger network has facilitated since its inception?
Yeah, I could definitely track that. I don't have like the percentage in front of me, so I can't answer that, but hopefully we have that person's name, Ben. Do we have that person's name? We can just follow up with them.
Yeah, we'll follow up with
Yeah, that's a
Jake
good
Bowman.
question. Um, yeah, I can follow up with that individual offline. I'll email you. I will say, yeah, the merger network has been around for 18 months. We aren't, I would just say this up front. We are not by design, like a broker dealer. We are not incentivized on consummating mergers. We are really focused on sort of like the not-for-profit, like making connections that are supported by member benefit. And if that just so happens to result in a merger, so be it. But ultimately, want to focus on sort of like um, what I said up front, which is sort of like, or in that slide is like a more data driven and competitive process so that ultimately, the theory that, the member is ultimately benefited by getting a look at multiple institutions and assessing, how from a dollars and cents perspective, like they would be benefited. So, to be fully candid, the scoreboard as it reads for the merger network is connections made, not mergers yeah, completed, although we will, and have seen the latter or sort of the output there. So yeah, I'll follow up with that sort of like percentage and I'll have to just like focus on the amount of time that we've been in existence there. So
I'm not seeing any other comments or questions coming through the chat or the Q&A section. So a couple quick plugs before we wrap up for today. And yeah, if you have any last minute comments or questions, please do drop them in. We are now having this webinar extended quarterly, and even as I say that, our next one is actually in Q3, but then from there, we're going to go quarterly. And so our next uh, merger trends webinar, stay tuned for the invite, but it is Wednesday, September 23rd at the same time. You'll all receive an opportunity to register for that. I'm going to go ahead to share the next two webinars that we have in front of us. Our next one coming up in a couple of weeks is the Credit Union Growth Playbook, kind of like wrapping in a lot of the things that we do here at CU Collaborate into a little bit more insights for you to take back to your credit union around growth. That will be Wednesday, August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern if you want to register for that. Take your phone out and you can scan this. You'll also, of course, get invites and this QR code in your inbox here on follow up. And then the next week, we just received the NCUA's updated LID workbook, which slightly changes the geographies that are kind of like captured by NCUA as it pertains to the low income designation. And so we're going to have one of our experts, Laura Gooding, talk through the changes and what that means for you, especially if you are a low income designated credit union or one seeking that designation. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending your brief moment of your afternoon with us here today. Thank you, Chris, for the content as always, and we'll look forward to hearing from you all, hopefully again very soon.
thanks everybody. Have a good summer.
Thank you.